Welcome back to the 31 Days of THORGIWEEN, and you guys know me. You know I'm a huge fan of horror movies, but I'm also a huge fan of horror video games, especially Resident Evil. Which is why it disappoints me to no end that to this day they have somehow managed to screw up every single movie based on that game franchise. But even though the Resident Evil movies continue to disappoint me again and again, I recently discovered it's not the only horror video game franchise out there to get a movie adaptation. Not that. That's a UA Bull film. That doesn't count as an actual movie. I'm talking about Dead Rising. Yes, there is not just one, but two movies based on this fan favorite franchise, and honestly, I'd include myself as a fan of this series. I always loved how crazy and zany the games were, how it let you turn anything into a weapon, how lovably oafish and unintentionally goofy Frank West was, and just how many zombies that you had to face. I mean, whenever you saw every inch of that mall covered in flesh-eating monsters, it was just jaw-dropping for the time, and each game in this franchise has attempted to keep that feeling of shock alive. And yes, I know there still haven't been any good video game movies yet, but for God's sakes, do you know how easy it is to make a zombie movie, especially one based on Dead Rising? I mean, even though I love it, Dead Rising was such a ripoff of Dawn of the Dead, they actually had to put on the cover of the game, this is not connected to that movie. Okay, so you've got a zombie film. That's simple enough. There are countless zombie films out there. Everybody knows how to make a zombie film. And it was heavily inspired by an already pre-existing zombie film. All you gotta do is watch that movie and you already have your blueprint. This sounds like the setup for the easiest adaptation in the world. How on earth could you screw up this Dead Rising adaptation?
Chase Carter here for Hit Point Digital.
Who the hell is that? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is our protagonist, Chase Carter, aka Not Frank. Yes, this movie is not meant to be an adaptation of the first game or any of the games, but instead is meant to be a new adventure set within the Dead Rising universe. And honestly, even though I want to point at that and say that's a ripoff, you're not trying to adapt the game, every single Dead Rising is set in a different town with a different protagonist on a different adventure. So honestly, it's more understandable here than it would be with a different game that always stars the same character. But Chase is covering a recent zombie outbreak, and the government has come in to give everyone doses of Zombrex, the medicine from the second game that prevents people infected by zombie bites from turning into them. However, it's quickly revealed after he arrives that the drug isn't working and everyone infected begins to turn, and now he has to escape. Along the way, he runs into a mother who has just killed her daughter and under the stress of the situation refuses to believe she's actually dead, and an infected woman named Crystal who has to keep taking Zombrex before she becomes a zombie herself. Now, so far I'm a bit disappointed because the only thing linking this to the games is the element of Zombrex, but I have to admit, that changes rather quickly because as this story goes along, they actually make it clear this is an actual adaptation. The people who wrote this actually did play the games and understood what made Dead Rising unique. You see, these characters start picking up random objects that they find and using them as weapons. Then they start taping them together to make even crazier weapons. And as this movie goes along, the military shows up to help contain the situation, and it very quickly becomes clear there's a conspiracy afoot involving the general, played by Dennis Haysbert, and how he's connected to the faulty Zombrex. And if you've played this game, then you know that weird conspiracies and mysteries about what caused the outbreak were always part of their stories as well. Heck, they even bring the psychopaths into this movie. Remember those crazy human villains who were just normal people who snapped under the pressure of a zombie apocalypse? Yeah, they even fit them into all this. So even though this is starring brand new characters, I have to give this movie credit because they actually crafted a new Dead Rising story rather than just slapping the Dead Rising title on a generic zombie film. Although, I will admit, I do miss Frank West.
Frank West famously survived the first zombie outbreak in U.S. history. He then rose to fame with his reporting on the 2006 outbreak in Willamette, Colorado.
Oh my God, they did it!
People are going to be gnawing on each other, eating flesh. That's what zombies do. Am I the only one who knows about zombies around here?
Yes.
Zombies, they eat people.
I'll admit, I honestly thought that they were going to find a way to cheat us out of Frank West for the rest of this movie, but they actually decided to bring him in here as a zombie expert on the news commenting on this crisis. And he's not just there for one joke, he's here throughout the whole movie, which I'll admit does raise the question, if you could get him to be here for the whole movie, why not just make him the protagonist of the whole movie? But it is still a nice way of paying tribute to him while crafting a new story. And they got Rob Riggle to play him, and I have to admit, that's actually not a bad choice. I mean, yes, he's about a foot taller than Frank, but he's still got the physique, the attitude. This is actually some of the best casting I've ever seen in a video game movie. Although, I do have to admit, they tried way too hard to make him jokey in this movie. And yes, I laughed at Frank in the games, but not because he was cracking jokes. More of just because he was kind of a dope. Here, it feels like they actually tried to make him comedic relief, and there are a few moments that it works, but for every moment where it does work, there's another one where it's groan-worthy. But overall, I still enjoyed him in here, and I think the interactions between him and the news anchor are actually some of the high points of this movie.
Frank.
That's a fact.
No.
Google it.
That is simply batshit crazy.
Well, they've been calling me that since Willamette.
So in all honesty, this movie actually is kind of impressing me because it tried to make something new so as not to step on the toes of the source material, but instead to expand the universe, and the process of doing that, they actually paid tribute to the source material and stayed pretty darn true to the rules of that source material, which is so much more than I can say for almost all other video game movies. However, that being said, yeah, this still isn't a good movie. I know, I hate saying it, because for once we actually got filmmakers who knew the source material, and I feel like when it comes to a video game adaptation, they should get a B just for getting that far, but I can't give it to them. This movie has problems. The camera work is the first thing I have to bring up. They tried to get some really interesting shots, but none of them really worked. Instead, the angles tend to just be jarring and take you out of the movie. Like, it'll just cut to first-person perspective out of nowhere, or it'll switch to the point of view of an item that a character is holding as they beat a zombie with it, or they will try and frame a shot so that it hides what is going on below the camera, but it's angled in a way that lets you know, yeah, nothing's going on below the camera. And the action is pretty weak too. I know none of these people are professionally trained fighters, but when they're swinging weapons around, they just look clumsy. And none of the actors are really bad, but they are kind of uninteresting, just really bland. Even Dennis Haysbert, who is known for being intense and overly dramatic, just sounds like he's in a really long Allstate insurance commercial. And if you take all that and then stretch it out for 2 hours, it becomes a chore to get through. In the last half hour of this film, I was fighting falling asleep because this film is paced so slowly and it drags so much. There's no reason for this to be 2 hours. You could easily have sped this film up and shorten it down by a solid half hour. And it's not just towards the end when it starts to drag. I remember thinking at one point, we have to be halfway through this movie, and I checked, we were only a fourth. And part of the reason this movie is so slow and so boring is because they forgot the most important element of these games. Yes, I applaud this movie for getting so much right about the games and clearly doing their homework, but they forgot the feel of the game, the tone of the game. This movie is super serious. It's about people struggling to survive, fighting to find the truth, and realizing they might never make it out alive. And yes, the game had that too, but they also had you putting Frank in a teddy bear costume, slapping a surfbot head on a zombie, and just turning the entire field into your playground. There are so many elements in the story of these games that makes it crazy and goofy, but the gameplay alone encourages you to go out of your way to have fun, and this movie misses that. They went way too serious, and that overly serious tone just translates into boring. And one last complaint. As I said, the games were known for blowing you away with the number of zombies on the screen at all times. Yeah, this movie didn't have the budget for that. Not only did the zombies look kind of basic, just some pale makeup and blood on the lips, but there's hardly any of them there. It feels like you could outrun these zombies no problem if you just duck between them. I mean, it's hard to feel bad for characters who look trapped when you could just turn left and be okay. This whole movie feels cheap. Way too cheap. I mean, when your biggest star is Rob Riggle and you can't pay him to stand up, yeah, you didn't have the budget to do this movie. And the sad thing is, you could have the budget for this. As I said, Dead Rising is all about picking up anything you can find and turning it into a weapon. This is the one time you could just stop for gratuitous product placement and nobody would complain because it would make perfect sense in this film. Beat a zombie to death with a George Foreman grill. Bash them across the face with a box of Pop-Tarts. Trust me, you go to enough people and ask, how would you like to see our hero kill a zombie with your product, and bam, you would get your budget. The bidding war to become the brand of OJ he drinks would double your number of zombies alone. So, end of the day, I hate saying this because this is actually a new story set in this universe that is actually accurate to the rules of this universe. Something very hard to pull off. Plus, I'll even admit, there are actually some pretty fun exchanges between Frank West and the news anchor. But aside from that, the bad camera work, bland characters, slow pacing, overall cheap look of the film, and just the lack of fun that defined this franchise, it keeps me from being able to actually enjoy it. However, they did actually try, and when it comes to a video game movie, that's way more than you typically get, so I'm still going to give it a 6 out of 10. However, there is a sequel to this movie, so maybe that's the one that actually got it right. Too bad I will never find out because I'm not watching that. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and remember, we're doing spooky reviews and other videos every single day this month, so hit that subscribe button and follow us on Twitter and Tumblr at Professor Thorgy. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and happy Halloween.